Three parts to this video. Number one, I'm going to respond to the previous video where I found all the dead hives, and that video has now received 1,600 comments, so I have a couple thoughts. Also, I'm going to show you what I found in the dead hives and what I think killed the bees. And the third part of the video is going to be what I learned and what's changing this year in the Vino Farm bee yard. Okay, so let me just briefly talk about the video I uploaded 3 weeks ago. I found 13 of my 14 colonies had died. I opened up all my hives. There was no activity. I sat down and I had a response. And what I said at the end of the video was my initial reaction. It was raw. It was what I was feeling at the moment. I hadn't opened any of the hives. I hadn't looked at bottom boards. I hadn't looked at mite counts. I hadn't looked for diseases. Nothing. It was just sort of a raw response. And I've never had a video kind of get that big that fast before, and I haven't had a video with 1,400 comments in a week before. But there were a lot of theories in the comments about what killed the bees, despite nobody having seen inside the hives, including me. A lot of people were saying it was mites. Some people were telling me my ventilation was too much. My ventilation was not enough. People were saying that I had too much insulation and the bees probably got too hot or something. Another big theory was that the sugar that I fed the bees was killing the bees, because I guess sugar kills bees, despite years of me feeding sugar and having years where I had 100% success through the winter and they didn't die then. I don't know. Someone was suggesting maybe that my arborvitae trees were creating humidity or something, that the black covers I used were baking the bees and they got too hot. I mean, it was kind of crazy what was going on in the comments. And I know a lot of people saw the video. It went pretty far in the beekeeping world, and there were forum posts and Facebook posts I saw, and people were a little bit mean. I mean, there were people going as far as saying that I let my bees die because I wanted views or sympathy or something. Just ridiculousness. I mean, I get it. It's the internet. People are insane, but yeah, I didn't let my bees die for views. And despite all the insanity, there were also a lot of very kind people in the comments, and people expressing sympathy and sharing their stories of losing their hives in a similar way that I lost mine. And my heart goes out to you who lost hives and had a rough winter. And I thank you for the kindness and, you know, just the good thoughts that you shared. I appreciate that very much. And there's also a lot of constructive criticism in the comments, and a lot of very, very helpful people very plainly telling me what they thought happened and giving me resources to back up their theories. And I had a lot of links and stuff, a lot of videos I watched, and I think I kind of know what happened now, and I know what I want to fix and what I want to change. And it's comments like those, the constructive ones, the helpful ones, that make me a better beekeeper. So thank you very much for sharing your expertise and for being kind. So I spent about a day and a half going through the dead outs, and I'm not going to show you all of them, but I will give you the highlights. I went through every single colony. I looked through every single frame. I went into the bottom boards. I looked through the bees on the bottom boards that were dead. I looked at the mite boards and was doing the mite tests on every single colony, looking for clues, looking for disease, looking for anything I could, you know, that would help me to figure out what killed them. So what I found was there were mites in every colony, which is to be expected at the end of a long winter. There were mites, and I know there were mites. What I did was took bees from the cluster on the frames, the remaining bees that were clustered up in the frames, and I took bees that were on the tops of the bottom board, like the last bees to fall, which is where I thought the heaviest concentration of mites would be. Roughly 300 bees. It was probably a lot more than 300 bees, but roughly 300 to 400 bees or so. And I would shake them and get the mites floating on the surface of the water, because dead mites float. So anyway, I was finding some colonies had 10, 12 mites in that kind of a sample. Some had a couple of dozen. So some had pretty heavy loads and some had not as heavy loads. Now, this isn't a scientific sampling and it's not an accurate count because these are the mites that had survived the cluster slowly dying off, migrating to the living bees. So the amount of mites on those bees in the clusters is going to be much higher concentration than were in the entire colony going into winter. So I don't know if I had tested, I would have found concentrations that high in the fall, or if they kind of got more concentrated over winter as bees died off, mites went to living bees. It's kind of impossible to say. The bottom line is there were mites in every hive. I thought that I had treated in the fall and taken care of the mites. I did my oxalic treatments in October, starting I think around the 1st of October. Wait a week, do a second treatment, wait a week, do a third treatment. At the time of doing the oxalic acid vapor treatments, by the third treatment, there were hardly any mites falling on the mite boards. So I thought in my mind, I'm good, there's no mites. So what probably happened though was the damage was already done. I think what happened was because the summer was so stressful and the bees were robbing each other so much, they were in and out of every colony constantly robbing. If there was one colony that had a heavier mite load, they all had heavy mite loads within a few weeks because the bees were just transferring mites all over the bee yard. So I think that what happened was this summer my mite load was a lot higher than it usually is, and I did not test last summer. Big mistake. That's my first mistake. I didn't test midsummer to see what the mite loads were, so I didn't know what they were. And I didn't treat. I should have been treating in the summer to take care of the mite counts, to get the mite counts lower so that the queen could be laying the winter bees in August and September in preparation for the winter. I didn't do that. So that was my error. And I had never done that in the past because every time I had tested in the past in the summertime, my mite counts were super low. Like I didn't require any kind of treatment. I've always treated in the fall. That's how it's been. And I got lazy last year and just said, I'm just going to do the same thing. I treated in the fall, took care of the mites, thought I was fine. But I wasn't. So that was a huge lesson learned. So I did find mites in every hive. Some had higher mite counts than others, but there were mites in each hive. The other thing I found was the colonies that I did find at the bottom on the bottom boards were all very small, like really small. Like I don't know where the rest of the bees went. I don't think that they were that small when I wrapped them because there were some colonies in there that seemed booming when I wrapped them up in late October or November with the insulation. I mean, I took note that like Adrian was slamming tons of bees in there and I thought they're going to make it at least. And when I opened them up, it was surprisingly, there was hardly any bees in there. There was only one colony, I think it was the rainbow swarm, where it actually had a very deep pile of bees in the bottom as if they had just recently died, maybe. But most of the colonies looks like they went into winter with very small clusters, or they had larger clusters and some bees just left to die, or I don't know exactly what happened. But what did happen was very small clusters died or fell to the bottom boards. And that's a huge problem. And that also goes back to the mite counts. So all this is tied to the summertime queens not laying when they needed to be laying. And the queen wasn't producing enough winter bees to get through the winter. So I need to address hive strength as well as dealing with the mites. All right, so what am I going to do to change to make sure this doesn't happen again? Here's the deal. Number one, mites. I have never treated for mites in the summertime because I'm always trying to time treatments around flows, and we have a lot of weird flows around here. We sometimes have a summer flow. We usually have a fall flow, except for years when we don't. But it's hard to time the treatments to get the flows in. So I'm changing my whole outlook on the flows from now on. I'm going to look at the fall flow as for the bees. Whatever they get in the fall, they get to keep. I'm going to concentrate on trying to get a summer harvest right around the end of July. So I'm planting nectar flowers that come up in June and July so the bees can bring in nectar, get some supers going in July so I can take supers off late July and then aim to do a treatment on August 1st, which is probably going to be Apivar. Put Apivar in August 1st and let the bees have all of August and the first week of September with the Apivar working in the hive. And that's usually the dry time anyway, when I'm probably going to be either feeding or supplementing in some way, because it's definitely a dearth in August. August, there's nothing going on around here. Take the Apivar out first, second week of September, and then if we do get a fall flow, that's going to happen mid-September. That's when the goldenrod and the knotweed and all the other stuff is really pumping in the fall when we have a good flow. So I can still possibly get a harvest in the fall if the bees, bring that all in and they bring in excess. I can still get a fall flow because there won't be a treatment on the hive at that time. So I can squeeze a treatment in August. That will also reduce the mite load so that the queens can be laying for the winter bees around, August, September, which is when you want the queen laying eggs without the stress of mites. So, mite treatment August 1st, comes out early, mid-September. Any flow I get in September is generally for the bees. Unless it's huge excess, then I get a second flow and I get a fall harvest. At that point, when all is said and done and all the supers are off the hives, I can do an oxalic treatment in October, November, like I usually do, which would sweep up any remaining mites. And if the hives are broodless, that's even better. So like late November even, I can come up here and do some oxalic. So that's my mite treatment plan right now. Aim 100% to get an August 1st treatment going in the hives and then do a fall treatment. So the other thing I need to address going forward is hive strength. And to do that, what I'm going to do is reduce the amount of beehives that I keep in this bee yard. I think over the past few years, I've gotten a little too big for my region. In a magical year like 2019, where we had a crazy continuous nectar flow for the whole year, and all these hives I had were filled with honey and nectar and pollen and happy bees, and the beekeepers in the area were saying that it was a record year, like they'd never seen before. That's extremely rare. What we usually have here is kind of a cold spring, a dry summer, and then we get a fall flow. And fall is usually the big place where people harvest around here. Spring flows are very hit or miss. Summer flows are almost non-existent. And it's the fall that we aim for, except for the last 2 years when we didn't even have a fall flow. So every year is different here. So I built up the bee yard thinking, the bees will go find nectar. They're bees. They fly and they find nectar. But I don't live next to farmland. I don't live amongst hundreds of acres of canola. I have a weird region that I live in. And it's a strange microclimate on top of a hill at 1,200 feet. These bees are foraging for meadows and, old wildflower fields on the side of highways and things. It's not a big nectar-rich area. So the bottom line is I need to reduce the amount of bees that I keep here so that they don't have to struggle and compete when it's a bad year. When it's a good year, it's great, but those are rare. When it's a bad year, too many bees is too many bees. So I'm going to reduce down to about 6 colonies this year and see what happens. I think 6 colonies will be easy to maintain, to treat, to get my sort of ducks in a row. And if they're all doing great, great. I don't need more than 6 colonies. If it's a bad year, 6 colonies is a lot easier to manage than 14 or 20. So that's the plan. The goal is to have a giant cluster of bees in every colony going into winter. Because all of my systems that I use, my wrapping and my insulation and my coroplast and my Vivaldi boards and the burlap and all that stuff means nothing if you've got a tiny cluster of bees, because they're not going to make it through a 6-month winter. So I need to have big, giant clusters of bees going into the fall. And to do that, I need bees that are not stressed out, that are not robbing each other, that are happy bees. So that's the goal. And I have a couple of ideas that I'm going to apply this year, and you will see them coming up soon. But basically, I'm going to do a little hive design change this year and try something different that I think will help the bees. And it will also help me as a beekeeper make things a little more simple. So stay tuned for that, because I think you'll be interested to see what I've come up with. We do have one great colony left here, and I'm going to propagate this colony. And these bees are going to make more bees, and these queens are going to be amongst my bee yard in the future. I've got 5 new colonies coming May 3rd, and I'm going to use them to help me build up the nukes that I'm going to build from this colony, which will produce more queens like this that survive the winter. So to wrap up, thank you so much for helping out and commenting on my videos and being generally nice in the comments. The majority of people that watched and commented were extremely nice, and I thank you very much. And you were very helpful, and you are making me a better beekeeper. And that's the goal, is to be a better beekeeper so that my bees stay alive and my bees are better bees. So I'm not going anywhere. I'm not going to stop making videos because of a bunch of commenters. I can take it. I'm not looking for sympathy. I'm not looking for donations. I'm not selling anything. I'm just trying to document my situation and what I do here. And I show you my wins and my fails. And you can take from it what you want. You can follow what I do and apply it to your bee yard, or you can just watch and be entertained, do whatever you want. But I'm going to keep doing what I do and keep trying to improve myself and keep trying to be a better beekeeper. And the things I learn, I share. And if it works for me, it might work for you. And I make videos that I wish I could have watched before I started beekeeping. That's my target audience, is me from 5 years ago when I started. There wasn't a channel like this one out there. So I made it, and I'm still doing it, and I'm still learning, and I'm still screwing up, and I'm still getting better. So that's where we are. Thank you for watching, and happy beekeeping.